In 2023, tenants across the United States began receiving rent increases that made no sense. The buildings weren't suddenly full, demand hadn't surged, the landlords were not talking to each other, at least not directly. The decision had been delegated to an algorithm. The software was called RealPage. It collected real-time pricing data from competing landlords and fed recommendations to all of them simultaneously. The effect? Landlords who had never spoken stopped competing on rent. The Department of Justice called it coordination. They sued. In November 2025, the case settled without RealPage admitting wrongdoing. What RealPage built was not a calculator. It was a coordination mechanism. Every landlord who used it fed their private lease data into the system. The system used that combined data to recommend prices to every landlord at once. Because the recommendation came from software, not from a competitor, each landlord believed they were making an independent decision. They were not. The DOJ antitrust chief said that competing companies must make independent pricing decisions. With the rise of algorithmic and artificial intelligence tools, we will remain at the forefront of vigorous antitrust enforcement. Algorithms, she said, are the new frontier of collusion. Not a new technology, a new disguise for an old one. In 2013, a judge in Wisconsin sentenced a man named Eric Loomis to 8 years and 6 months in prison for driving a stolen vehicle and fleeing from police. Included in the sentencing report was a risk score from a software system called COMPAS, Correctional Offender Management Profiling for Alternative Sanctions. The score classified Loomis as high risk. Loomis challenged the score in court. He wanted to know how it was calculated. The Wisconsin Supreme Court ruled he could not find out. The algorithm was protected as a trade secret owned by a private company. A man whose prison sentence was partly determined by a proprietary formula had no legal right to examine that formula. 3 years later, ProPublica analysed COMPAS scores for 10,000 defendants in Florida. Black defendants were almost twice as likely as white defendants to be incorrectly labelled high risk by the model, flagged as future criminals who did not reoffend. White defendants were more often incorrectly marked low risk when they did. The algorithm's creator later admitted he designed it for prison rehabilitation planning, not for sentencing. This is the claim that makes algorithmic decision-making so difficult to challenge. The algorithm is objective. It has no feelings, no prejudice, no bad day. It applies the same formula to every input. Here is what that claim misses. An algorithm is a mathematical function trained on historical data. If the historical data reflects a world where certain groups were systematically disadvantaged, in lending, in policing, in hiring, the algorithm does not correct for that. It learns the patterns inside that data and optimizes for them. Amazon discovered this in 2018 when it scrapped an AI hiring tool that had learned to downgrade resumes containing words like women's, as in women's chess club captain, trained on 10 years of hiring records from an industry that skewed male. Amazon's case was different. The algorithm was doing exactly what it was trained to do. The training data was the problem. Every institution in this video faced the same accountability problem. RealPage's pricing algorithm was not subject to antitrust review until a journalist exposed it and the DOJ sued. COMPAS's sentencing formula cannot be examined by the defendants it sentences because it is a trade secret. Reuters reported that Amazon's hiring tool had spent 4 years penalising resumes containing female-associated language before anyone outside the company knew it existed. When a banker denied your loan in 1960, you could argue with the banker. When a judge gave you a harsh sentence, you could appeal to a higher court. When an algorithm does either of those things, the formula that produced the decision is, in most cases, proprietary. You cannot interrogate a trade secret, and you cannot cross-examine code. These are 3 cases from 1 decade. The pattern they share is not a technology story. It is an institutional power story. Algorithms inherited power that used to require accountability. The credit score was the original case, and the deepest one. That is the next video. If you want to understand how systems work before they shape your life, subscribe.